There's a small brown box sitting on my kitchen counter right now, mailed to me 3 years after the night I'm about to tell you about. I haven't opened it yet. I will, before this story ends. But first, you need to understand what happened on our 15th anniversary, the night my husband stood up in a room full of our closest friends and told everyone the business we'd built together would belong to his real family. Because everything that box contains only makes sense once you know what I handed him first. My name is Lily Harper. I'm 35 years old, and for 15 years, I believed I had built a life with a man named Richard. I was wrong about that. I had built a business. He had built a second life beside it, one I knew nothing about. We married when I was 20. I used the $40,000 my mother left me to sign the lease on our first warehouse, on Cedar Street, the same week we got back from our honeymoon. I skipped my sister's wedding because we couldn't afford to close the shop for a weekend. I never took a real vacation. Richard told me over and over for 15 years that one day it would all belong to us. I believed him every single time. So when we gathered 40 guests in a room decorated with photographs of that same warehouse, our first delivery van, the folding table we used as a desk for 2 years, I expected sentiment. I expected Richard to thank me. Instead, he raised his glass and said, 15 years is a long time, but tonight I want to make sure this business ends up where it belongs, with my real family. I noticed the silence in the room before I understood the sentence. Then he introduced a woman named Vanessa Cole, someone I had never once seen at a family event, and her son, Ethan, 19 years old. Richard announced that Ethan would be the future of Harper Supply. I felt the floor disappear beneath me. Lily helped me build it, he told our guests, smiling like it was a kindness. But family is family. Some people were here for the business. Others were here because they were my real family. I looked at Vanessa. She wasn't surprised. That told me everything. This had been planned for months. I didn't cry in front of anyone that night. What I did instead was study the folder Richard had left open on the table. A proposed ownership transfer, dated 6 months earlier. Ethan's name typed neatly beneath a signature line. 6 months. He had been planning this while we picked out flowers for our own anniversary dinner. What followed were 3 months I don't talk about often. I hired a forensic accountant and quietly began tracing money I wasn't supposed to notice. It took him 11 days to find the first discrepancy, and after that, the rest came faster than either of us expected. I found 7 years of payments to a company Vanessa controlled, meaning his second life had started long before that night, long before Ethan was even old enough to understand what his father was doing. I found company funds financing the house they lived in. I found a version of my marriage that had never actually existed the way I remembered it. But here's what Richard never understood, not even standing in that room. 15 years earlier, when our business was 2 people and 1 folding table, I had insisted our shareholder agreement include a clause protecting either of us from exactly this: an undisclosed ownership transfer, funded by diverted company money, attempted without the other founder's approval. If it happened, the wronged founder could trigger a mandatory buyout, at a valuation that punished the misconduct. Richard forgot that clause existed the moment we signed it. I never forgot a word of it. So that night, while he was still smiling, still certain I was too stunned to respond, I stood up. I walked across the room holding a plain cream envelope. "You're right about one thing, Richard," I said. "It's time this business belonged to its family." He smiled wider, thinking I was agreeing with him. I placed the envelope in his hand. I watched the color leave his face, page by page. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "I've known for 3 months," I told him. His attorney read over his shoulder and went pale. "Richard," he said quietly, "she has the right to trigger the buyout." Richard assumed he'd simply lose a few shares. I told him the rest. Because the misconduct involved diverted company funds, the valuation on his stake had just collapsed to almost nothing. He'd spent years stealing from the company to build a future for people who, it turned out, had never legally owned a single share of it.
He kept reading the pages in his hand, as if a fourth read might change what the first three had already told him.
Vanessa turned on him first. "You told me the company was already ours," she said. He had no answer for her. Ethan turned on him second, and what he said stayed with me longer than anything Richard did that night. "You told me she didn't know," he said. "You made me the reason you were lying to her." Ethan wasn't the villain of that story, and I never once believed he was. He was 19, living inside a lie his father had written for him without his knowledge. "So, you're taking everything?" Richard asked me. "No," I said. I moved my controlling interest into an employee ownership trust, so the people who had actually built Harper Supply beside me, not for me, would own a piece of what they'd spent years creating. An employee named Martha stood up and told the whole room that I had once made payroll out of my own savings the month Richard wanted to close the doors for good. Nobody in that room doubted who the business really belonged to after that. "You didn't betray me tonight, Richard," I told him once the room had gone quiet again. "You betrayed me every day you let me believe our life was real, while you built another one beside it. The worst thing you did wasn't loving someone else. It was believing everything I built could be handed away like I never existed." He didn't argue with that. He just stood there, the envelope still open in his hand, looking at a room full of people who had already stopped waiting for him to explain himself. He reached for our history then, our first shop, our wedding, the years we'd struggled through together, side by side. "Those memories belong to me too," I told him. "You don't get to use them against me." That was 3 years before the small brown box arrived on my counter, postmarked from Denver, no return address, mailed by a law firm 4 months after Richard died of heart failure at 47. Inside was a single item, wrapped in tissue paper gone brittle with age. The original napkin, folded and refolded until it had nearly worn through at the creases, where Richard and I had sketched our very first business plan the week after we got married. He had kept it, through everything, in a safe deposit box no one else knew existed. His will listed one line for the person who was meant to receive it: the only real family the business ever had. I sat with that for a long time. He had spent an entire dinner telling a room full of people I wasn't his real family, and then spent his last months making sure I was the only person who received anything of meaning when he was gone. Both things were true about him. Both things had always been true about him. I didn't put the napkin in a drawer. I framed it and hung it in the hallway of the company he no longer had any claim to, right next to a photograph of myself at 20, standing outside our first warehouse on Cedar Street, holding a set of keys I hadn't yet learned to be afraid of losing. He spent 15 years deciding who counted as family. In the end, it was never his decision to make.